All right, well, it's 2 o'clock, so let's get started. So welcome, everybody, to the session on Untangling the Tangled Web, take off my mask, of online presentation. We are delighted to have an illustrious panel. I'm not so illustrious. I am Gail Hodges, the Executive Director of the OpenID Foundation, and I'm delighted to call several of these folks on the stage my friends here and colleagues in this struggle to figure out how we achieve online presentation for digital identity credentials. So let's start going down the line with a few intros. So would you like to get us started?
Yeah, we're going to have to figure out which of the some aren't friends on here. Then we'll have a conversation about that. So Ryan Galuzzo, I'm the Identity Program Lead for NIST Applied Cybersecurity Division. In that role, I kind of help coordinate a number of different projects we have at the National Institute of Standards and Technology focused on identity and connecting those projects and kind of establishing a strategic view on identity. One of the other things that I do is I'm the co-lead on our mobile driver's license project within the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which I'll talk about a little bit more throughout this presentation.
Thanks, Ryan. John?
John Bradley. I'm involved in 2 to 3 of the 4 European large-scale pilots on national IDs. I'm also one of the editors of the FIDO specifications, looking at how FIDO can be used for key management for verifiable credentials, and also one of the authors of the Federation spec, the OpenID Federation spec, looking at how we can establish a trust framework and not wind up having localized islands of identity.
Ajay Gupta, Chief Digital Transformation Officer for State of California Department of Motor Vehicles. Very focused on transforming the business for Californians, all 31 million Californians who we hold the identity for. Also sponsoring the mobile driver's license for State of California, as well as the digital wallet.
And I'm Rick Byers. I'm the Web Platform Area Tech Lead on Chrome at Google, and I've been in the web space for a long time, but I'm pretty new to this identity space. It's my first time at Identiverse. Thank you for having me. And I'm just excited. I think we're undergoing a process of raising the level of abstraction of what the web is. Privacy and other things are forcing us to really think about the web as a platform at a higher level and have things like browsers and operating systems reason about identity. And I think that's an exciting opportunity for all of us.
Great. So I'm just going to take us through a little bit of admin for the benefit of the group in case we need it. So if we need definitions, conduit communication protocol that provides security and interoperability when passing a payload being the formatted information sent through it. A digital identity in the context today is that set of electronically captured or stored attributes, taking the definition from the OECD. So that's what we are referring to in our discussions. And there's a couple of different ways to talk about centralized versus decentralized. John just spent about 10 minutes in our last panel talking about how he dislikes the term decentralized as being more of a marketing term, but it does offer some privacy benefits to when you introduce a wallet into the mix. So we're going to move on to the fun part of our discussion, which is what on earth has been happening around digital identity and how to present digital identity credentials onto the web. Some of you that I'm guessing have packed yourselves into this room is that you might have been following some of the fireworks over the last couple of years that this debate has been going on, because worlds have been colliding. Very different players have been colliding. So we have at least 4 different standard bodies in the mix. Who is going to jump in and take us through the 4 groups first?
I think I was nominated to do that. I work for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, so everyone said you should talk about the standard stuff. And actually, if you could hop back real quick to that decentralized versus centralized picture. This is a pretty simple picture, right? If you look at this concept of either centralized or decentralized, it looks like, hey, we should be able to just write a thing super fast and be done, right? It should be easy, right? And the fact of the matter is, I think one of the most important things to remember with all of this stuff is, in particular when you're talking about identity, is there's a lot of orchestration and coordination that needs to be involved with identity, whether you're talking about creating workflows for your end users, whether you're talking about establishing federation internal to your organization and single sign-on, or whether you're talking about establishing a digital identity that is part of a decentralized or wallet-based model. It's not simple. It's an abstraction and a set of things that needs to be coordinated in order to make these things work. And when you start peeling apart the layers, particularly from a kind of a decentralized perspective, you start to see that not only are there a lot of standards and protocols layered on top of each other, but each one of those is owned by a different organization. Right, and so if we can hop back to that slide, we can talk a little bit about some of the different parties that are involved today. But we've got the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, which is responsible for the data model and the structures around verifiable credentials. They also have a working group that's been set up right now, or at least they call it the YCG. It's essentially an incubation group that's focused on developing APIs within the browsers to help support presentation and selection of wallets. You've got a number of other kind of things going on there as well too. You've got the VC API working group that's developing credential issuance and credential request APIs. The OpenID Foundation, represented by Gail up here, is working on a number of different models for how you actually present these things. We've got OpenID for verifiable presentation. We've got OpenID for verifiable credential issuance. We've got a number of different things like the high assurance profile of those things. So how do we actually create and present that information out across the internet, and how can it be requested and received by different entities? That's where OpenID's kind of been focusing. We've got ISO, so the International Organization for Standardization, which kind of triggered some of these bigger conversations around mobile driver's license. And so within the NCCOE, our National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, we are very focused on understanding these kind of mobile driver's license standards, where they exist today and where they're going next, and how they fit within this broader context. So they have, even within there, 3 different, actually more than that. They have the mobile driver's license 18013-5, which presents essentially your core set of functionality around a mobile driver's license. It presents the data model for that. They got 18013-7, which is how do you actually present these things online, which actually references out to things like the OpenID for verifiable presentation protocols, as well as kind of a REST API protocol that can be used there as well too. Then they have the 23220 series, which actually lays out kind of a more neutral, not mobile driver's license or driver's license focused model of what kind of, what other kind of MDoc-based mobile document-based versions of credentials can we issue here. So there's essentially 4 main entities, and there's others like IETF that's working on the JSON web token aspect of things. And essentially there's, what you could describe as like this ever-expanding set of participants and players. If you've got an acronym and you produce standards, you're probably involved in this in some way, shape, or form. But I would say that, from our view at NIST, one of the things we've been trying to focus very heavily on is how do we help to bring some of these efforts in alignment? How do we coordinate with folks at W3C, the OpenID Foundation, the FIDO Alliance, and ISO to make sure as these standards and as these protocols start to mature, we're not creating a situation where we've got stovepipes or pipelines of different kinds of credential types that can't work together. And how do we make sure we start thinking about that end user experience of, I don't want to have 15 different wallets for 15 different types of credentials and 15 different types of credential formats. I want to have one wallet that can interoperate, maintain multiple different kinds of credentials and credential formats, and present them in an easy and consistent way online. I would also add, just kind of generally speaking, the kind of tangled web metaphor, I think, actually makes it feel a little bit more pessimistic than it is. I think, in particular, recently we've started to see a lot of things heading generally in the same direction. I think there's a lot of core principles between the different entities involved that are very similar, focusing on things like selective disclosure, enhancing and preserving privacy, building out user control and user capabilities that are built within these different credential types. I just got back from taking my kids to Hershey Park. So I feel like this is much less about a tangled web or like a knot that can't be undone. It's a little bit more like bumper cars right now. We're all kind of going in the same general direction, but every so often, there's different theories, different concepts, different modes of thinking that result in us kind of bouncing off each other. But we're still generally heading on that correct curve in the same direction.
I like the optimism there, Ryan, but I think there has also been some Fight Club elements, like people getting down.
I don't know about Fight Club. And again, I think with all these things, there's a lot of people who have really deeply ingrained, viewpoints on a lot of the stuff, and they want to make sure that however this gets implemented, it's done in the right way. It protects privacy. It preserves the end users.
Yeah, I think everyone has always had good intentions, but maybe coming at it from different perspectives, like different starting points, right?
Different perspectives, different jurisdictions, different backgrounds. I think there's a lot of things that kind of play into where those bumper cars collide and how hard they actually collide.
So that's a good segue to where people have approached this space, like the challenge of creating digital credentials and presenting them online through the web. There's been different ways that the identity world might have approached it, or ISO might have approached it. John, I think, would you be able to share a few comments on how the OIDF or FIDO would be approaching this challenge of online presentation?
I can take a stab at it. Hopefully it won't be too controversial. So Tim Berners-Lee, who basically is, the person who drove the web standards W3C, has a vision of something called the semantic web, where based on RDF, which is a data representation format, you can traverse the web and discover everything about everything else. Sort of a philosophical view. And the W3C verifiable credentials data model format fits into that. So it's basically RDF based and fits into the overall sort of world data model so you can publish these things on what originally the design for them was things that get published on web pages and can be signed as part of a web page, making statements about things on the web, which sort of makes sense in that context. Not everyone needs an open or closed world data model for a driver's license. So there has been moves to take some of the verifiable, not all verifiable credentials are W3C verifiable credential data model credentials. So there's a number of different formats. The ISO has created the MDoc format. At IETF, we created selective disclosure JOTs which are conceptual at a high level. They're very similar to ISO MDocs. There's a few subtle differences, but essentially they get you to the same place where the holder can selectively disclose individual fields. You don't have to disclose everything about the credential depending upon where it's created. A lot of stuff has moved from W3C over to IETF. I'm co-chair of the of Jose, where we're developing JWP, which is the zero knowledge proof version of the Jose stack, where we can use advanced cryptography. The European Commission has identified that we need to eventually move to advanced cryptography to get all of the privacy benefits, though that's not going to happen sort of inside of the next 5 years. So we have to, in the short term, deal with traditional cryptography and some of the workarounds like MDocs and SDJOTs for being able to do those presentations. And OpenID has been dealing with the more or less traditional plumbing. How do you get a credential into a wallet or holder? How do you get that credential from the holder to the to the verifier? And how do all of these people trust each other and trust, at least from the is this a multilateral federation point of view, is much more complex because we have more parties. Originally, you had if somebody's logging in with a Google credential, you have a bilateral relationship and you know what Google does. And if it's a Gmail address, they're probably authoritative for that. We have log in with Facebook and log in with Azure. And all of those tend to be represented as bilateral relationships where everybody knows what's going on. But now we don't want all of the issuers to issue their own wallets. You want multiple you want people to be able to choose a wallet and put credentials in it. So the issuers have to be able to trust the wallet. They have to be able to trust that the wallet does the right thing with the credential and has the appropriate security. So, what do wallets need to do to express their qualities to the issuers so that we don't wind up in a world where there are, per credential wallets, which is something that some people think is kind of okay. We also don't want the other end where only the platforms can hold these credentials and are the only ones that are trusted. We also need to figure out how the RPs can be trusted by the wallets who are acting on behalf of the issuers. So does every relying party get every element of a driver's license or a passport, etc.? Who gets to ask for this information? Under what conditions is it disclosed? With my research and education hat on, we have entity categories in Internet 2 and the other research and education federations, which govern what attributes a given relying party will get under what circumstances. I imagine that similar sorts of assurances are going to need to be put in. And relying parties, how do they get trusted by everyone? If a relying party in Europe gets a QWAC, which is the European Trusted Certificate for an entity, how is that trusted by California? Are we going to have relying parties have to figure out where your browser is coming from and give you a different certificate depending upon what wallet you might hypothetically use? We also have the browsers who quite legitimately don't want to leak privacy information, and that's in the W3C side, where we're looking at the browser API for doing this, where we don't want to leak what wallets a given user has to relying parties. Because what wallets you have actually tells a whole heck of a lot about you. If I have a wallet from Uruguay, you might, as a relying party, be able to guess that maybe that's where I'm from. If you have a wallet from American Airlines, then maybe I'm an American Airlines customer. So leaking what wallets before the user actually has the ability to consent is actually a pretty bad design from a privacy point of view. So we have to think through all of these things so that we don't accidentally create a worse privacy situation than we're trying to solve by introducing this three-party model.
So thanks, John. Many facets to the problem. So I'll pass over to you, Rick, to see kind of from a browser perspective, if John hasn't stolen all your thunder, how the browser community has approached this problem historically and currently.
Yeah, maybe I'll try and add some of those fireworks you mentioned. Even within these groups, right? So within the W3C group, we're many different groups, and so for example, there's a group of folks who've been working on defining things on top of the web platform, JSON formats and, this verifiable credentials, the credentials community group, working for years to do great work defining all these types of credentials. And then, at some point they asked, if the browsers would help them out. And we were all like, oh no, that sounds scary. Government identities on the web, we're working on trying to improve privacy on the web. We don't want to touch that with the 10,000-foot pole. And then at some point, we realized that it was going to be counterproductive, that there's so much momentum around the space. Digital wallets are already in wide use. In particular, the eIDAS regulation is really going to accelerate use in Europe. It's going to compel a lot of parties to accept these digital credentials, including Google as an RP. And so we realized, actually, we're probably not doing anyone any favors by kind of sticking our heads in the sand and saying we don't want to be part of it. And so the first thing we did was Apple had this proposal for a browser API for exposing MDocs and MDocs only. And we said, that sounds good. We're gonna block this custom schemes you all are using. We think that's bad. We're just gonna block it in Chrome, and we're gonna use this. We're gonna support this MDoc API instead, which was really stepping in the middle of something we didn't realize we were getting into the middle of. Right, this whole fight over what are the formats that credentials should be in? What are the different protocols for talking to them? And so we very quickly got a lot of feedback that was. A pretty narrow view of the problem space that we were new to. And then we spent about a year trying to undo some of that, trying to build trust with the different groups and try to say, no, okay, we want to understand the space better. Let us help us understand how the browsers can help you, and realized we needed instead to come up with a primitive that was format agnostic, that supported an open ecosystem of wallets, not just wallets from big tech companies, for example. And we came up with a set of principles around that and tried to shop it around, and that's what we formed this W3C group around now. But it was an awful lot of learning of bringing different communities together. And even now, right, within the W3C, we have our groups that are focused just on privacy. And as we start to talk to them about this stuff, all of them are like, whoa, that all sounds scary, you shouldn't touch it. And even amongst the browsers, at the moment we have the Chromium project, represented by Google, and the WebKit team from Apple, saying that they support adding this API. And we have Mozilla saying that they're opposed to it because they're worried about what negative things might happen as these credentials are used more and more online. So it's complicated, but I agree with Ryan that we're mostly trying to achieve the same outcomes. It's just very unclear. How do you achieve high security, high privacy, low friction, at this ecosystem scale of the entire internet, and protection from all these bad actors? Everyone's opinion kind of differs on how do we actually put ourselves on that course.
Very much a huge evolution. So before we go into some of the government challenges, I actually was going to tap on you, Ajay, to say how you thought about implementing and going live in an environment where these things are still getting worked out. Right? It's a real struggle for a government implementer to find their footing when the sand is shifting.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, something I deal with myself and the team that's putting together the digital wallet that we have created for California, which is the reason why it actually coincidentally has this unique hybrid approach where we are supporting more than one format for the digital credentials. We support the ISO format, but we also support the verifiable credential format at this point in time. So that's pretty unique. I want to say, while EU has talked about this particular aspect, we are the only ones at this point in time who has actually implemented this hybrid approach. And the reason for that was exactly things are moving. There is VHS and there is Betamax, right? Who's going to win the race at the end of the day? We are not necessarily interested in calling out a particular standard, if that's good or not. We do have some basic principles that haven't changed around security and privacy for our residents in California. And as you know, California has some of the strictest privacy laws in the nation, so kind of staying in line with that. But also, it's while you all are really working on, so by the way, honored to be part of this esteemed group talking about these standards. While you're talking about the end state, my problem is not just in space in terms of getting where we want to get to, but also in time. What do we do till then? We have already established that the current implementations of how the identity is proved and how the identity is verified is really subpar for the digital world, right? We still will take a photocopy of a passport or a driver's license and we'll have tons of operational cost and still have a risk at the end of the day associated with the fraud for the services that we provide to Californians. So we know that we want to get there as soon as possible where we have cryptographically safe digital credentials available for people to present. We reduce the operational burden, we reduce the transaction cost, and we give the power to the holders the same way they have with the plastic card today. But while doing that, not avoid the digital trace that becomes very big problem as soon as the digital credentials are out there in the world. So all those problems, kind of thinking through that, that's why we started to look at these standards. That's why we have this hybrid wallet. That's why we have the first online implementation of a digital credential in the nation at this point in time that lets you log in, that lets you verify your identity at this point in time. The reason for that is we know that whatever we are doing at this point in time is better than what we have today with the physical world. So a lot of that, and also the problem of the digital trust that you talked about, the practical problem for us is, well, when somebody is presenting the information, given this new world that we are living in, because plastic cards have been out there for, 100 years, this is all new. Residents are not trained to know what is good or what is bad for them. So, right, there is that initial knowledge that the populace does not have on what is the right way to use it. So the digital trust service, while we are working on trust for issuers, meaning people who are using our driver license, they know that this is a legit driver license or an identity card, but people who are holders are handing it over to, how are they going to use that information, and can we trust them, right, digitally? Are they going to make the mistake? Is it going to, by mistake, release the information, and now that becomes permanent problem because now all the digital identities has been shared in an ecosystem that's really bad for us. And then the problem of the browser selection, right? As we look at online ecosystems, to your point, not knowing which wallet it's going to, but still be able to share the identity, but not be constrained by what the implementer may be picking, like a format. So all those things we had to think about and care for as well. And we are really part of this journey, taking step by step the approach, even looking at draft standards, implementers' drafts, to be able to put together some of these credentials that we have on our wallet today.
So if I take the wider question of what some of the government concerns, might have been, both yourself, Ryan, and Ajay, as well as Paulo de Rosa and this colleague, Andy Reichfeld, had a chance to kind of share some of the asks of the standards groups, like the W3C and the OIDF DCP working group, because there was a recognition we hadn't quite nudged as close together as we could. This was, a month or two back. And so you had come in and had some concerns and some asks of what would be useful. Would you share some of those thoughts? And I know things have come a distance even in that short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've come a long way very quickly, and that's why I'm fairly optimistic that we're at least,
we'll get there at the end.
We're going in the same direction until someone turns their bumper car around and goes the complete opposite direction, and everything gets chaotic again. But I mean, I think we can kind of lump it into two groups. There's one, the side of the conversation about how do we help coordinate these things, right? Because we showed W3C, OpenID Foundation, ISO, FIDO Alliance. It's working on the kind of the client to authenticator protocol and how that can be used. And then there's also the question of actually understanding the implementation side. And so on the coordination side, I think we've done a lot to start the conversations and have these different organizations start to collaborate more actively, lay out things. Wouldn't necessarily call them roadmaps, but a collective vision for how they fit together, where we should be going with these things. And then the other big thing within those organizations as well, too, is starting to understand, and I think it's been partially brought up a little bit today, what are the different roles and responsibilities of the entities involved? What's the responsibility of the issuer, right? Who's managing consent? What's the role of the browsers within the flow? How much responsibility do they have to protect the end user versus the issuer and the relying party and the verifier? So how do we actually structure all of those different relationships, define them so that everyone understands, hey, all right, when I arrive at the verifier or the relying party and I say I would like to use my mobile driver's license or my digital verifiable credential, this is the expectation of behavior I can get from that relying party. Then when that request is sent to the browser, how does the browser field that, react to it, and how do they present those options then to the end user? What kind of consent or information or warnings might need to be flagged there if it's a relying party that doesn't behave well? And then what has to be done from a wallet perspective to present to that user, hey, here's what you're releasing and how you're releasing it and why you're releasing it and to whom you're releasing it. So there's a lot of kind of complicated interactions that need to be understood. And then I think once you get those laid out and understood and defined, you get a better understanding of how the different protocols fit together, and then from an even more important perspective, how do you communicate to the end user? Because we can sit up here and have very intense debates all day about W3C verifiable credentials versus MDoc, STJOT versus JSON LD, and at the end of the day, if the end user does not understand it, is confused by the workflow, and doesn't really practically understand where it fits into their life, they're not going to use it. And so all of those debates are kind of pointless unless you kind of create that good used understanding for that end user, and you're able to communicate what the interactions are going to look like. And a lot of that has to go with both making sure that those are defined for the different standards bodies to understand how their protocols need to interact, but also then from an implementation side, understanding how that feeds into the user's experience and how that feeds into the ultimate adoption. Because again, that's going to be very heavily driven by the user understanding it, and understanding how it works, and also the relying parties, to Ajay's point, of, you know, how do I actually integrate this into my business process flows? How do I understand how it mitigates risk? How do I scale the trust more broadly across the ecosystem, understand which credentials I can use and which credentials I can trust and which can be integrated into my processes sufficient to address, you know, broader risk. So, and we showed a picture up there with 4 bodies representing kind of some of the online presentation side of the house, but you also need to think about, once this starts to expand to different use cases, regulators for like the financial institutions, regulators for the healthcare space, they need to understand as well too how these credentials work, how they're structured, and how they actually mitigate and deal with risk. So being able to make sure, at least from a standards coordination perspective, we've got roles and responsibilities defined both between the different entities and the different coordinating entities that work within there. So ISO, FIDO, places like that. And then also on the kind of implementation side, understanding how the decisions made around the standards and protocols ultimately influence the experience that the user has.
Good. Anything else to add? Anyone else on the panel around the asks from those of you who are in the room?
In terms of the government concerns?
Yeah, the government concerns and asks of the standards bodies.
Yeah, there's a lot of asks from my side, at least, of standards body. Number one is, I think, and we have seen the examples in the previous finalized standards even, that a lot is left for the industry to figure out, which I think is a good thing. I think it propagates innovation in the sense, but it also can propagate some lock-ins, for specific vendors as you're leaving things open. And some of the classic examples might be, 18013-7, which is the online specification that's coming up, is when the example that was just given by Rick was around, initially it was only going to be a particular data format, which is the MDOC data format. That locks in or locks out verifiable credential as a data format for wallet selection. So as you go to an online site, as you choose to do a transaction, which then sends a signal to your operating system, and then operating system figures out what all wallets you have that you can present, and then transmit the information on. The format itself was being locked down. So we worry about that quite a bit. Us as regulating I want to call it regulating body in terms of regulating the use of the product that we create, which is the identity of an individual, right? Not necessarily regulating the market in the sense, but just to make sure that we are not locking in particular vendors or preferring specific vendors. It's important that the standards bodies pay attention to that. NFC is another example where the standards went for, you could use NFC or you could use QR code. NFC obviously gives a better experience, but it definitely had a particular vendor lock-in component to it at the point when it was released. So those are some examples where the standard bodies need to think about a little bit more on what's being thought about and what's available in the industry today to create a more responsible, more equitable outcome out of this. Outside that, the cost of ownership is also important. The plain simple example is the digital credential that's issued. You want to be able to refresh it every X number of days, so it's always current, right? Are there other approaches that could be there? Because for an issuer, the burden for a public entity like us is that now you got to continue to maintain, right? This life cycle management has a cost associated to it. It's not a one and done plastic card that you issue and it's used in the world. Now it has a upkeep, right? The love and care that you need to provide for the credential to remain current. So it's the cost of ownership is also important when you're looking at the standards as well. And finally, I want to say change management, right? It's a word that has been overused, but it's extremely critical here. The world we live in today, my innovation professor used to call it, recombinant innovations and disruptive innovations, right? Recombinant innovations, you start and you give a step and a path in the middle, and then you have the end result. Disruptive is completely changing the industry and usually has adoption issues. People don't know what to do with it. And it could work, it may not work depending on the time and the need. So from change management standpoint, the example for online is, today's world, for good or for bad, the online has this, take a picture of a document that goes into, as a proof of verification later that yes, that particular ceremony occurred in the back-end systems. But for a digital credential, once it's done, right? Maybe perhaps for good reason, all the evidence is destroyed. Should we be creating some sort of evidence for internal auditors and for internal operations to be able to verify who are used to something physical? Well, physical is not the right word. Something digital that's visual, right? Cryptography is not digital, that's visual. So how do we create that or fill that gap in so you can actually be practical and pragmatic about the approaches? So those would be the asks of the standard bodies.
Yeah, and I would say that to kind of build off of that, one of the things we're trying to do within the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, who's familiar with the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence? That's actually a pretty decent number of hands. It's kind of a branch of NIST where we do applied research. We actually bring technology into a lab. We do builds. We try and do these things so they're focused on the practical build out of what this could look like in the real world. And one of the things we are very focused on is we actually have a mobile driver's license project that is ongoing right now. We're hopefully getting CRADAs out very soon to actually be able to announce who our partners are going to be. But one of the main focuses is being able to look at how mobile driver's license verifiable credentials can be applied to specific verticals, specific communities, and how can we actually understand what their requirements are so we can start to look at things like Ajay brought up of like, what are the flow down requirements that need to be applied to an actual process, a business flow, to be able to say, all right, this is how we use this in a way that's consistent and compliant with what is expected from that organization. So looking at things like in a financial customer identification program use case, what's the audit trail that needs to be established? How do we get the auditors or regulators to understand this is what's available now, this is what's not available, based upon how these things are structured? You're not going to have a photocopy of a driver's license. What you might have is some kind of signed representation, some kind of cryptographically protected version of it, but you're not going to have that same thing that you had before. How do we help communicate that to regulators? How do we help them understand the value of that when it comes to their actual processes and practices and risk mitigation? So that's one of the things we're really looking at, is how we can also communicate outside of the technology lane to the auditors, to the regulators, to the compliance folks, so they understand this is how it fits into your overall scheme and allow you to make more effective adoption decisions from an implementer's perspective.
So, Ryan, that's a great transition to the next block, which is ideal because teeing up the NCCOE as a real-world way of demonstrating the use cases and the -7 implementation and the different options is incredibly useful. And I think you're going to get lots of CRADAs, so I think you're in a good place. Maybe you're swarmed with CRADAs at the moment. I wanted to go on and show briefly the demonstration that we have, Ajay, of the California DMV credential. So I'll tee that up, and then I'm going to come over to you, Rick, and we'll talk about the work that's happening in the W3C right now with the Digital Credentials API, both of which are steps in a new direction here. So do you want to intro this slide, and then I've got the video on the next one? You want to let people know what they're about to see?
Sure. So we have dabbled with two different online use cases at this point in time. One is to verify identity, which essentially replaces your need to upload a passport or a driver license, and also have the back office auditing in place. And the second one is plain simple, being able to validate you as who you are and being able to then get online services, which is plain simple passwordless online. Online identity verification or online sign-in. So that would be the intro.
All right, let's see if it works, if the demo gods are with us.
It works. She's talking about internet connection here.
Internet connection. No. It works, yes. The solution worked. Let's see.
It's like a 10-second snippet, I believe, right?
Maybe if I take it out.
Click on that link, maybe that'll work. Just there you go.
I think I got to go in.
I don't think this even has
sound. Playing on my screen. That's not helping.
Oh, you just had it. There you go.
Oh, there.
Just leave it right there.
I don't know if it's showing on that screen. That's what she's talking about. So you gotta drag it to the other screen. Or I can just talk about it. There's nothing special to see here.
Yeah, that's right. Everyone come and have a look.
It essentially is a way for...
If you have trouble remembering your username and password to log into your MyDMV account, Don't worry. The DMV offers you an easy alternative by using the secure and convenient DMV Wallet and Mobile Driver's License app. If you're using a computer or laptop, go to dmv.ca.gov/mydmv.
Oh dear. Now
And click the DMV Wallet icon at the bottom of the page. A QR code will appear on your screen. Now, open your DMV Wallet on your mobile device.
Since they cannot see, I can just describe
scan the
it.
code on your
Is
computer.
that okay, Gail?
Yeah,
Then tap the
I
accept
actually
button
can't turn
on
it
the next
off
screen.
either. So
Now go back to your computer and you'll see you've successfully accessed your MyDMV account. You'll know you're logged in when you see your name.
it's not my computer, it's somebody else's computer.
So whoever is a California
Now, just
resident.
complete your
okay, I
DMV
can at least stop it.
business.
Hold on.
If you're using it.
Pause it. So whoever is a California resident can actually do that on www.dmv.ca.gov. If you're looking for online service, just go and look for use my MDL. Assuming you have an MDL, at this point, I'm out of the California DMV wallet. It's essentially using the OID for VP flow, which is OID for verifiable presentation flow at this point in time. And as you know, the DMV wallet has two types of credentials, the ISO specification credential, but also a verifiable credential format, the W3C VC format as well. Every single time somebody gets their mobile driver license after verifying their identity, which requires liveness and possession of the card, and us matching the information and the photo, and that you're real, you're you, and you are who you're claiming to be. We issue these two credentials. Then you go to the DMV website. If you're ready to log in, it'll present a QR code. In the wallet, there is a online presentation mode. You click on that, it'll let you scan the QR code. Then the negotiations start per the OID for VP. A consent. This is all based on consent, right? Nothing is transmitted without the consent. It lists the elements that the relying party, in this case DMV, is requesting. In this case, everything right now, really, but soon to be minimized. And then it'll log you in because the verified information, which is your driver license, has matched the record. In your case, it could be something else too, could be email and other things too. So that's how it verifies essentially on the website. The user experience is scan the QR code, press the consent, and the website automatically refreshes and takes you into the DMV online system. In another use case, you're presented the information, so you can choose to say that, well, I'm going to use my MDL or I'm going to just upload my driver license. If you choose to use MDL, present the QR code, consent, transmit the information, and then you're good. In case of a upload, you'll actually upload the image, and then we have our back office team verifying the information, right? There's humans required. So the cost savings is between about $8 to $10 if you take the cost of the tech, the aggregators, and the human verification that's required as well. So that's what we have calculated to do for every single transaction that's performed. So there's quite a bit of benefit there by more and more people using the digital presentation rather than a copy of a physical thing.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to jump onto our last section here because we only got 7 minutes left. So you could riff for us for a couple minutes, Rick, on the W3C credentials API and the milestones that have been met in the last couple of months, because it's been an exciting time.
Sure. So what AJ described is great for specific use cases like logging into the California DMV website. But when we tried to play this out, how is this? If this model gets adopted broadly, what's it probably mean? It probably means people are going to have a bunch of different wallets, maybe one for their California driver's license, maybe they need a different one for their passport, maybe they need a different one for their memberships. Websites might need to have a bunch of buttons, click here if you have this wallet, click here if you have this wallet. There was risks around phishing attacks, because the way that the websites talk to the wallets today is it's not very sophisticated. It's just the wallet registers as handling a special type of URL. We call a custom scheme. And that doesn't provide protection. There's limitations in the kind of attacks you can protect with for that. And maybe even most importantly is it can be a disruptive user experience. To be you're on a web page and you click a button and you get taken into your wallet app, and then you're done in the wallet app. How do you get back to the web page? Has the web page gotten unloaded from memory while you were gone, right? Were you in the middle of a purchase that now the page is going to be confused because it's unloaded? And so we tried to look at all of that as an opportunity to could we design something that actually had operating system and browser support to provide a better experience. And so what you see here on the right is a screenshot of what we call the credential selector that is now in beta in Android. And so wallet applications can register with the system and basically say, here's I'm a wallet, here's how I match credentials. And then when an app, including a browser, says, I want credentials for this request, we can show a selector to the user, and no information is shared with the wallet yet. It's just the wallet is able to indicate if it has credentials and what credentials it has that might match the request. And so this can show up as a bottom sheet over top of a web page, for example, and the user can swipe through and say, oh, yes, I want to present this credential. And when they tap that blue button there to continue, now they're taken into the wallet app that gets to, again, show a little bottom sheet that's overlaying the browser or whatever else the user was doing, and get the appropriate consent from the user to share the information back with the web page. So this is kind of what I was talking about in terms of a higher level of abstraction, a first-class API with operating system support. And the browser wants to do this because also we think this is how we can help be part of the solution. We promise our users we help protect their information online, right? We have systems like safe browsing that try to detect malicious activity and try to stop it. And so with a higher level API like this, we don't get to see the responses. It's all encrypted. We don't get to see the PII. We don't want to see the PII, but we get to see the requests that we can form an opinion of, hey, does this look like something that might be an attack on the user? And if so, can we intervene and give the user a warning? Or is this something that's almost certainly, can we help the user reason about the privacy implications of what they're about to do? And so we were struggling, for a while, it felt like maybe we were too late to really add any value in the browser and the operating system. But we did hear one particular pain point is a lot of credentials are used on desktop devices today, and all the wallets are on mobile devices. And yes, you can scan a QR code, but we thought with OS support we could do even better. So Google and Apple worked together and gave a demo at IAW a few months ago where we showed Chrome running on a Mac and going to a website that wanted a credential, and the user being able to just use their iPhone or their Android phone to present from their phone. The first time you do that, there's still a QR code flow, but it uses the same system as passkeys for hybrid authentication. So it uses BLE to verify presence, so it's quite secure. And then it can also set up a secure channel so that future presentments, you don't need to use a QR code at all. So it can be very low friction improvement to the user experience for these cross-device scenarios. So I think, to me, the main outcome at IAW, we're still trying to figure out did we have a chance to influence the EIDAS reference framework that's about to be published and then passed into law in Europe pretty soon. We still don't know for sure about that, but the latest version that John mentioned that was published has some changes in it that look positive for us. We hope that our APIs will be allowed to be one of the ways that can satisfy the EUDI support. And yeah, here's a photo of, after we gave the demo, a bunch of folks, including people very active in the EUDI community, Gail asked them, who thinks this is an important part of the future of online credentials or something like that. We got lots of hand raises and whatnot. So it felt like good alignment and good momentum.
And I can't speak for Europe, but I can say from a NIST perspective at least, the work that Rick and team are doing is unbelievably important. So having a secure user experience that is cross-device is incredibly, incredibly important to the U.S. government. There are not a lot of people out there who interact with the U.S. government through mobile apps. So being able to have that established in a way that is phishing resistant and generally seamless to the end user, I think is incredibly important to potential adoption further down the road for federal agencies that are looking to leverage these both for online identity proofing and authentication use cases. So one, I want to applaud you for that work. I think it's incredibly important, and it's also one of the reasons we've been pushing so hard on W3C and OpenID Foundation to kind of engage and get that use case and that workflow pushed forward as well too. So
great. So we have 2 minutes left.
I will just add that the QR code cross-device flow that wallets are currently using has been successfully attacked in a number of countries. People have lost their entire life savings because they thought they were entering a contest and their social security accounts were emptied because the same national application that you authenticate with also gets into your bank and other things. So it is critically important that we use a secure tunnel, and even though there's a QR code involved in the flow, they really do have totally different security properties. And that's one of the more compelling reasons to move to the browser API where we're reusing part of FIDO.
Good. So I think we've got time for one quick question. Got a quick one up in the front?
Yeah, Steve Johnson, American Express. I got a question to Ajay. We're seeing a lot of inertia when it comes to all the different types of standards. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. We're seeing a lot of inertia when it comes to the different types of standards, not wanting to make any moves into this space until some of this gets sorted out. Is there any quick background you can give on the conversations that led to the decision to adopt a hybrid approach? You said it's better than what we're currently doing, but was that kind of a unanimous point of view, or was there some selling that you had to do to take action?
Well, at a minimum, we wanted some footprint of whatever we do. So we knew that with ISO spec, we had footprint with TSA as the actual use of these credentials. And we knew with verifiable credential, we had a footprint with this age verification system called TrueAge. So those were the starting points for us, where you have, well, at this point, I'm 26 airports, but hundreds by end of this summer. And then also with TrueAge, thousands of POS devices, right? And then we knew with online that it's ripe for public sector use cases, with California Department of Motor Vehicles, obviously, as a starting point, just to kind of showcase what we are doing ourselves. But our employment development division, right? The EDD for unemployment benefits and things like that, saw a whole lot of fraud. Our corrections, there is health and human services for homeless, etc. So we already had mapped out the demand for the type of use cases and which particular standard is ripe for use. So that was really our thought was we need to have some use cases that are ripe for adoption. So start there. Otherwise, it's a catch-22 problem there. You don't get adoption till you have use cases, and you don't have use cases till you have adoption. So that was our criteria.
And the one thing I will add on to that as well too is from a NIST perspective, we are looking to actively integrate the concept of whether you want to call them mobile driver's license, verifiable credentials, or some other version of the kind of digital representation of identity online into our digital identity guidelines. So we're looking to integrate them in as part of the identity proofing process. We're looking to integrate them in as part of the authentication process, and then tying that all together with guidance that comes out of the kind of federation in 863C for how you actually implement and present that information as part of the workflow.
Great.
So I will say for Europe, we're looking at all of the nations are looking at doing a hybrid approach with both MDoC and selective disclosure dots, and eventually moving to some sort of JWP with zero knowledge proofs. So it's sort of having format agility is important because we're not anywhere near being able to deploy the ideal solution at the moment. So it's like crypto agility. We're going to move both format and the underlying cryptography to newer things as they come along.
Right. Thank you. So I think we'll leave you with this picture that we're in a much better place of consensus than we were many moons ago. Certainly over the last 18 months to 3 years, it's made incredible leaps forward in the last few months. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all for attending. Feel free to ask us questions later.